Yogendra and his team were part of a mission to recapture Tiger Hill, a strategic point in the Kargil War. The enemy had occupied the hill and had an advantageous position to attack the Indian army. The operation was carried out in extreme conditions where the soldiers had to climb the steep hill at night, avoid being detected by the enemy, and face tough challenges like low oxygen levels, icy winds, and heavy loads on their backs. Despite the challenges, they carried on without rest, guided by their faith and trust in their country. The next morning, they reached the foothill of what they believed was Tiger Hill and set up their camp there. However, as they climbed that peak, they realized that it was not the main peak and that they had to keep moving. They continued to climb, hiding themselves from view and deploying their arms on the peak. Their soldiers were sent to re-see the area, but the enemy spotted them and started firing. The team had to think quickly and protect their soldiers. They called out to them to remain behind the rocks and waited until it was dark to take them out of harm's way. One soldier was shot in the arm, but they managed to bring them all to safety by 11 p.m. that night. The injured soldier cried out in pain, and Yogendra thought that it must hurt a lot to get shot. Despite the challenges and danger, they continued their mission, driven by their sense of duty and love for their country. Yogendra and his comrades had been climbing up the steep terrain towards Tiger Hill for what seemed like an eternity. The lack of oxygen at such high altitude was taking a toll on their bodies, and they had to stop frequently to catch their breath. As they approached a seemingly impossible cliff, they knew that they had to cross it if they wanted to reach their destination. With the help of a rope, they climbed uphill along the steep climb, one by one. Yogendra was the first to pull himself on top of the cliff. Looking around to ensure the ground was clear, he carefully tied the rope to a rock and helped the other soldiers climb up. The night was deathly silent. As the sky began to lighten, they suddenly heard gunfire from both sides of the cliff. Yogendra and 7 others had managed to climb up, but the rest were stuck below due to the heavy firing. With their route cut off, they moved ahead and came upon a large plain area where 2 enemy bunkers were stationed. Yogendra and his comrades took positions and started firing, managing to kill the soldiers in the bunkers in direct face-to-face combat. Despite the danger, he was determined to fight back and defeat the enemy. Without hesitation, he and his comrades rushed towards the enemy bunkers, throwing out the dead bodies of the enemy soldiers and taking over the bunkers. Fierce fighting erupted between the 2 sides, with heavy firing and artillery from both sides. The Indian soldiers were determined to win, and no one could deter them from their purpose or move them from what they had already captured. As the battle raged on for 5 long hours, their ammunition began to run out. Yogendra and his comrades called out to their comrades below to send fresh supplies, but they were unable to move due to being surrounded by the enemy. Their bullets flew overhead, making it impossible for them to pick up the ammunition thrown up by their team below. With no other options, Yogendra and his comrades decided to kill the enemy soldiers close to them, hiding behind the rocks so that they could use their ammunition. They stopped firing at the enemy soldiers for a while, and as expected, the enemy soldiers emerged from behind the rocks to check if they were dead. Yogendra and his comrades took advantage of the situation and took their positions behind rocks, waiting patiently. The enemy soldiers fired at them for some time but stopped when they did not hear any response. The Indian soldiers remained silent, almost holding their breath, waiting for the enemy to make their move. Finally, after minutes of waiting, the enemy soldiers emerged from behind the huge boulders, and Yogendra and his comrades were ready. Yogendra and his team of soldiers found themselves in a precarious situation. They had just defeated a group of enemy soldiers, but knew that a retaliation attack was imminent. Huddled behind a large rock, they quickly seized the opportunity to collect weapons and ammunition from the fallen enemy soldiers. With their newfound supplies, they prepared to defend themselves from the upcoming attack. As they worked to secure their position, heavy firing suddenly erupted from the enemy's direction. Yogendra and his team could do nothing but wait and brace themselves for impact. After what felt like an eternity, the enemy soldiers ceased firing and began to chant religious slogans. They threw stones and grenades, hoping to take out Yogendra and his team. Despite the chaos, Yogendra remained calm and focused. He and his team had taken cover in the crevices between the rocks, observing the enemy's every move. They waited patiently for the enemy soldiers to approach, knowing that their timing had to be impeccable if they were to defeat the larger group. As the enemy soldiers approached, Yogendra and his team readied their weapons. They waited for the perfect moment when the enemy soldiers were completely exposed and had nowhere to hide. When that moment finally came, Yogendra and his team unleashed a hail of bullets, taking out the enemy soldiers in one swift blow. Soon, Yogendra and his platoon were again in the middle of a heated battle. They were fighting bravely, but they knew that it could be their last few minutes alive. Their heavy weapons were destroyed, and they were being bombarded with grenades and bullets from all sides. Havalder Madan, the platoon commander, called out to Yogendra, "Pick up that LMG and throw it to me. I can fix the spare barrel onto it and make it fit for firing." Yogendra immediately threw the LMG to him, but it was the last time he heard Havalder Madan's voice. The situation was getting worse, and they were running out of options. Yogendra and his comrades were determined not to retreat, so they kept fighting. Yogendra noticed that a comrade who fired sniper rifles was surrounded by enemies, so he and his comrade Anant Ram went to help, but as soon as they advanced towards him, a grenade fell near them and burst. Yogendra was hit by shrapnel behind his knee, and the piercing pain made him feel like his leg had been cut off. He fell and looked back to see the extent of damage the grenade had done. While giving himself first aid, another grenade burst in front of him, and a shrapnel hit him under his eye and nose, causing a deep wound. Yogendra felt like he had lost his eyesight, and for a long time, he could see nothing. But with time, he could see some light seeping into his eyes. He noticed that his whole body was covered with blood, and his nose was bleeding heavily. Yogendra mustered up all his courage and dragged himself to his comrade Lance Naik Naresh Kumar, who was trying to make his bunker higher and firing back at those who were firing at him. Yogendra sat with his back to a rock and started firing, trying to clean the blood from his nose. He asked Naresh for first aid, and Naresh promised to do it soon. But just as Naresh raised his hand to open his field paddy, a bullet hit him on the head, and his head burst open. Yogendra held his hand as he fell backward, but he couldn't hear anything except gunfire. Yogendra's comrade Anand was sitting by his side when he told him that Naresh had been hit. Anant was stunned, and just as he was about to say something, a bullet hit him on the chest, and he was gone in a moment. Bullets rained on them afresh, and the enemy had surrounded them on 3 sides. Yogendra lay on the ground, his body riddled with bullet wounds. He could see the enemy soldiers moving around him, firing at the dead bodies of his comrades. He knew that he was the only one left alive, and he had to act fast if he wanted to save his team from being wiped out. With his left hand and right leg severely injured, Yogendra lay still, drawing on his spirituality to maintain his calm and mental strength. Yogendra lay still, watching as the enemy soldiers shot at his dead friends to confirm their kills and loot their weapons. Suddenly, one of the soldiers turned and fired at him. The bullet hit the coins in Yogendra's pocket, deflecting in another direction. The soldier took his AK-47 and walked away. Yogendra knew that he had to do something to stop them. As he lay there, he prayed for an opportunity, for a chance to save his team. He knew that his only chance was when the soldiers became careless. Just then, their commander sent a message to their base camp in the Mushko Valley, informing them that they had killed a group of Hindustani soldiers and were making their way down the mountain. Yogendra listened carefully, knowing that he had to act fast. With his last bit of strength, he managed to send a message to his comrades, warning them of the enemy soldiers' plans. He knew that it was up to them now to finish the mission and honor their fallen comrades. Thinking fast, Yogendra took out a grenade, removed its pin, and threw it at the enemy soldier. It got stuck in the soldier's jacket, but he didn't realize it. When he tried to remove the jacket, the grenade exploded, killing him instantly. The explosion caused chaos among the enemy soldiers, who were unsure of what to do. Taking advantage of their confusion, Yogendra grabbed the enemy soldier's rifle and fired at them from behind rocks in several locations. His renewed attack devastated the enemy, who started running towards the top. Yogendra chased after them, dragging his lifeless body, and fired at them until they were out of sight. He then crawled to where his comrades lay, hoping to find someone alive. Sadly, he found them all dead. Feeling disappointed and heartbroken, Yogendra wept for his fallen comrades. But he quickly regained his composure and began to think of ways to save his post and fellow soldiers. He pepped himself up to take action and protect his comrades, no matter what the cost. Yogendra's broken arm hung from his body, the bone protruding out of the skin. The pain was unbearable, but he knew he had to act quickly. He prayed for strength and guidance as he surveyed the desolate snow-covered mountains around him. Suddenly, he felt a calling and started to make his way down a rocky path. Yogendra's broken arm throbbed with each movement, but he managed to tuck it into his belt to reduce the pain. As he rolled down the rocky terrain, he stumbled upon a nala and hung precariously from a rock. With soldiers below him, Yogendra realized that he might be on enemy territory. Thankfully, He recognized one of his fellow soldiers and called out for help. The soldiers quickly came to his rescue and tended to his injuries. They thought he was going to die, but Yogendra was determined to live. He urged them to defend the post from an impending attack by the enemy. The soldiers dressed his wounds and listened intently to his story. Despite his critical condition, Yogendra regained consciousness 3 days later in a hospital in Srinagar. There he learned that his team had successfully launched an attack on Tiger Hill, hoisting the Indian flag on top. Yogendra was later awarded India's highest military decoration for his extraordinary show of bravery and valor in the battlefield.